The history of Buddhism spans from the 5th century BC to the present, which arose in and around the ancient Kingdom of Magadha, and is based on the teachings of Siddhārtha Gautama in the eastern part of ancient India. This makes it one of the oldest religions practiced today. The religion evolved as it spread from the northeastern region of the Indian subcontinent through Central, East, and Southeast Asia. At one time or another, it influenced most of the Asian continent. The history of Buddhism is also characterized by the development of numerous movements, schisms, and schools, among them the Theravada, Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, with contrasting periods of expansion and retreat. Siddhārtha Gautama. Siddhārtha Gautama was the historical founder of Buddhism. He was born a Kshatriya warrior prince in ancient India, which is now located in present-day Lumbini, Nepal. The dates of his birth and death are still a point of controversy, but most scholars suggested that the Buddha died within approximately a few decades on either side of 400 BC. His particular family of Sakya-Kshatriyas were of Brahmin lineage, as indicated by the family name Gautama. 19th century scholars, such as Eitel, connected it to the Brahmin rishi Gautama. In many Buddhist texts, Buddha is said to be a descendant of the Brahmin sage Angarasa. For example, in the Pali Mahavaga, Angarasa occurs as a name of Buddha Gautama, who evidently belonged to the Angarasa tribe. Scholar Edward J. Thomas too connected Buddha with sages Gautama and Angarasa. After asceticism and meditation, Siddhārtha Gautama discovered the Buddhist middle way, a path of moderation away from the extremes of self-indulgence and self-mortification. Siddhārtha Gautama attained enlightenment sitting under a peepal tree, now known as the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, India. Gautama, from then on, was known as the Enlightened One, the Samyak Sambuddha. Buddha found patronage in the ruler of Magadha, Emperor Bimbisara. The emperor accepted Buddhism as his personal faith and allowed the establishment of many Buddhist viharas. This eventually led to the renaming of the entire region as Bihar. At the Deer Park near Varanasi in northern India, Buddha set in motion Wheel of Dharma by delivering his first sermon to a group of 5 companions with whom he had previously sought enlightenment. Together with the Buddha they formed the first Sangha according to the scriptures. Later, after an initial reluctance, Buddha also established an order of nuns. Fully ordained Buddhist nuns are called bhikkhunis. Mahapajapati Gautami, the aunt and foster mother of Buddha, was the first bhikkhuni. She was ordained in the 6th century BCE. For the remaining years of his life, the Buddha is said to have traveled in the Gangetic plain of northeastern India and other regions. Buddha attained parinirvana in the abandoned jungles of Kusinara. Just before Buddha died, he reportedly told his followers that thereafter the Dharma would be the leader. The early Arhats considered Gautama's words the primary source of Dharma and Vinaya, and took great pains to formulate and transmit his teachings accurately. Nonetheless, no ungarnished collection of his sayings has survived. The versions of the canon preserved in Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, and Tibetan of sectarian variants of a corpus that grew and crystallized during 3 centuries of oral transmission. Early Buddhism remained centered on the Ganges Valley, spreading gradually from its ancient heartland. The canonical sources record 2 councils, where the monastic Sangha established the textual collections based on the Buddha's teachings and settled certain disciplinary problems within the community. First Buddhist Council. The First Buddhist Council was held just after Buddha's parinirvana and presided over by Gupta Mahakashyapa, one of his most senior disciples, at Rajagriha during the 5th century under the noble support of King Ajatasattu. The objective of the council was to record all of Buddha's teachings into the doctrinal teachings and Abhidhamma and to codify the monastic rules. Ananda, one of the Buddha's main disciples and his cousin, was called upon to recite the discourses and Abhidhamma of the Buddha and Pali. Another disciple recited the rules of the Vinaya. These became the basis of the Tripitaka, which is preserved only in Pali. Actual record on the First Buddhist Council did not mention the existence of the Abhidhamma. It existed only after the Second Council. Second Buddhist Council. The Second Buddhist Council was held at Vaishali following a dispute that had arisen in the Sangha over a relaxation by some monks of various points of discipline. Eventually it was decided to hold a second council at which the original Vinaya texts that had been preserved at the first council were cited to show that these relaxations went against the recorded teachings of the Buddha. Asokan proselytism. The Mauryan Emperor Asoka converted to Buddhism after his bloody conquest of the territory of Kalinga in eastern India during the Kalinga War. Regretting the horrors and misery brought about by the conflict, the king magnanimously decided to renounce violence, to replace the misery caused by war with respect and dignity for all humanity. He propagated the faith by building stupas and pillars, urging, amongst other things, respect of all animal life and enjoining people to follow the Dharma. Perhaps the finest example of these is the great stupa of Sanchi. It was constructed in the 3rd century BC and later enlarged. Its carved gates, called Toranas, are considered among the finest examples of Buddhist art in India. He also built roads, hospitals, rest houses, universities and irrigation systems around the country. He treated his subjects as equals regardless of the religion, politics or caste. This period marks the first spread of Buddhism beyond India to other countries. According to the plates and pillars left by Asoka, emissaries were sent to various countries in order to spread Buddhism, as far south as Sri Lanka and as far west as the Greek kingdoms, in particular the neighboring Greco-Bactrian kingdom, and possibly even farther to the Mediterranean. Third Buddhist Council. King Asoka convened the Third Buddhist Council around 250 BC at Pataliputra. It was held by the monk Moggalaputta. The objective of the council was to purify the Sangha, particularly from non-Buddhist ascetics who had been attracted by the royal patronage. Following the council, Buddhist missionaries were dispatched throughout the known world. Hellenistic world. Some of the edicts of Asoka describe the efforts made by him to propagate the Buddhist faith throughout the Hellenistic world, which at the time formed an uninterrupted continuum from the borders of India to Greece. The edicts indicate a clear understanding of the political organization in Hellenistic territories. The names and locations of the main Greek monarchs of the time are identified, and they are claimed as recipients of Buddhist proselytism. Antiochus II Theos of the Seleucid Kingdom, Ptolemy II Philadelphos of Egypt, Antigonus Gonatas of Macedonia, Magas in Cyrenaica, and Alexander II in Epirus. The conquest by Dharma has been won here on the borders, and even 600 yoanas away, where the Greek king Antiochus rules. Beyond where the 4 kings named Ptolemy, Antigonos, Magas and Alexander rule, likewise in the south among the Kolas, the Pandyas, and as far as Tamrapani. Furthermore, according to Pali sources, some of Asoka's emissaries were Greek Buddhist monks, indicating close religious exchanges between the two cultures. When the Thera Moggalaputta, the illuminator of the religion of the conqueror, had brought the council to an end, he sent forth Theris, one here and one there, and to Aparantaka he sent the Greek name Dhammarakita. Asoka also issued edicts in the Greek language as well as in Aramaic. One of them, found in Kandahar, advocates the adoption of piety to the Greek community. 10 years having been completed, King Byadas made known piety to men, and from this moment he has made men more pious, and everything thrives throughout the whole world. It is not clear how much these interactions may have been influential, but some authors have commented that some level of syncretism between Hellenist thought and Buddhism may have started in Hellenic lands at that time. They have pointed to the presence of Buddhist communities in the Hellenistic world around that period, in particular in Alexandria, and to the pre-Christian monastic order of the Therapitare, who may have almost entirely drawn inspiration from the teaching and practices of Buddhist asceticism, and may even have been descendants of Asoka's emissaries to the west. The philosopher Hegasias of Cyrene, from the city of Cyrene where Magas of Cyrene ruled, is sometimes thought to have been influenced by the teachings of Asoka's Buddhist missionaries. Buddhist gravestones from the Ptolemaic period have also been found in Alexandria, decorated with depictions of the Dharma wheel. The presence of Buddhists in Alexandria has even drawn the conclusion it was later in this very place that some of the most active centers of Christianity were established. In the 2nd century AD, the Christian dogmatist Clement of Alexandria recognized Bactrian Buddhists and Indian gymnosophists for their influence on Greek thought. Thus philosophy, a thing of the highest utility, flourished in antiquity among the barbarians, shedding its light over the nations, and afterwards it came to Greece. First in its ranks were the prophets of the Egyptians, and the Chaldeans among the Assyrians, and the Druids among the Gauls, and the Sramanas among the Bactrians, and the philosophers of the Celts, and the Magi of the Persians, who foretold the Saviour's birth, and came into the land of Judea guided by a star. The Indian gymnosophists are also in the number, and the other barbarian philosophers, and of these there are two classes, some of them called Sramanas, and others Brahmins. Clement of Alexandria, the Stromata, or Miscellanies, Book 1, Chapter 15. Expansion to Sri Lanka and Burma. Sri Lanka was proselytized by Asoka's son Mahinda and 6 companions during the 2nd century BC. They converted the king Devanimpi Utissa and many of the nobility. In addition, Asoka's daughter, Sanghamita, also established the Bhikkhuni in Sri Lanka, also bringing with her a sapling of the sacred Bodhi tree that was subsequently planted in Anuradhapura. This is when the Mahavihara monastery, a center of Sinhalese orthodoxy, was built. The Pali Canon was written down in Sri Lanka during the reign of King Vatagamani, and the Theravada tradition flourished there. Later some great commentators worked there, such as Buddhaghosa and Dhammapala, and they systemized the traditional commentaries that had been handed down. Although Mahayana Buddhism gained some influence in Sri Lanka at the time, the Theravada ultimately prevailed, and Sri Lanka turned out to be the last stronghold of it, for there it would expand again to Southeast Asia from the 11th century. In the areas east of the Indian subcontinent, Indian culture strongly influenced the Mons. The Mons are said to have been converted to Buddhism from the 3rd century BC under the proselytizing of the Indian Emperor Asoka. Before the fission between Mahayana and Hinayana Buddhism, early Mon Buddhist temples, such as Pedano in central Burma, have been dated to between the 1st and the 5th century CE. The Buddhist art of the Mons was especially influenced by the Indian art of the Gupta and post-Gupta periods, and the Manras style spread widely in Southeast Asia following the expansion of the Mon kingdom between the 5th and 8th centuries. The Theravada faith expanded in the northern parts of Southeast Asia under Mon influence, until it was progressively displaced by Mahayana Buddhism from around the 6th century AD. According to the Asokavadana, Asoka sent a missionary to the north, through the Himalayas, to Khotan in the Tarim Basin, then the land of the Tocharians, speakers of an Indo-European language. Rise of the Shunga. The Shunga dynasty was established in 185 BC, about 50 years after Asoka's death. After assassinating King Bhadrata, military commander-in-chief Pushyamitra Shunga took the throne. Buddhist religious scriptures such as the Asokavadana allege that Pushyamitra was hostile towards Buddhists and persecuted the Buddhist faith. Buddhists wrote that he destroyed hundreds of monasteries and killed hundreds of thousands of innocent monks. 840,000 Buddhist stupas which had been built by Asoka were destroyed, and 100 gold coins were offered for the head of each Buddhist monk. In addition, Buddhist sources allege that the large number of Buddhist monasteries were converted to Hindu temples, in places like, but not limited to, Nalanda, Bodh Gaya, Sarnath, and Mathura, among many others. Modern historians, however, dispute this view in the light of literary and archaeological evidence. They opine that following Asoka's sponsorship of Buddhism, it is possible that Buddhist institutions fell on harder times under the Shungas, but no evidence of active persecution has been noted. Etienne Lamotte observes, to judge from the documents, Pushyamitra must be acquitted through lack of proof. Another eminent historian, Romila Thapa, points to archaeological evidence that suggests the contrary to the claim that Pushyamitra was a fanatical anti-Buddhist, and that he never actually destroyed 840,000 stupas as claimed by Buddhist works, if any. Thapa stresses that Buddhist accounts are probably hyperbolic renditions of Pushyamitra's attack of the Mauryas, and merely reflect the desperate frustration of the Buddhist religious figures in the face of the possibly irreversible decline in the importance of the religion under the Shungas. During the period, Buddhist monks deserted the Ganges Valley, following either the northern road or the southern road. Conversely, Buddhist artistic creation stopped in the old Magadha area, to reposition itself either in the northwest area of Gandhara and Mathura or in the southeast around Amaravati. Some artistic activity also occurred in central India, as in Bharat, to which the Shungas may or may not have contributed. Greco-Buddhist interaction. At the start of the Silk Road in the crossroads between India and China, Greek kingdoms had been in place since the time of the conquests of Alexander the Great around 326 BC and continued for over 300 years. First the Seleucids from around 323 BC, then the Greco-Bactrian kingdom from around 250 BC, and finally the Indo-Greek kingdom, lasting until 10 CE. The Greco-Bactrian king Demetrius I invaded the Indian subcontinent in 180 BC, establishing an Indo-Greek kingdom that was to last in parts of northwest South Asia until the end of the 1st century CE. Buddhism flourished under the Indo-Greek and Greco-Bactrian kings, and it has been suggested that their invasion of India was intended to show the support for the Mauryan Empire and to protect the Buddhist faith, for the alleged religious persecutions of the Shungas. One of the most famous Indo-Greek kings is Menander. He converted to Buddhism and is presented in the Mahayana tradition as one of the great benefactors of the faith, on a par with King Asoka or the later Kushan king Kanishka. Menander's coins bear the mention of the Saviour King in Greek. Some bear designs of the eight-spoked wheel. Direct cultural exchange is also suggested by the dialogue of the Milindapana around 160 BC between Menander and the Buddhist monk Nagasena, who was himself a student of the Greek Buddhist monk Mahadharmaraksita. Upon Menander's death, the honor of sharing his remains was claimed by the cities under his rule, and they were enshrined in stupas. In a parallel with the historic Buddha, several of Menander's Indo-Greek successors inscribed "follower of the Dharma" in the Kharosthi script on the coins, and depicted themselves of the divinities forming the Vataka mudra. It is also around the time of initial Greek and Buddhist interaction that the first anthropomorphic representations of the Buddha are found, often in realistic Greco-Buddhist style. The former reluctance towards anthropomorphic representations of the Buddha, and the sophisticated development of aniconic symbols to avoid it, seem to be connected to one of the Buddha's sayings, reported in the Nikaya, that discouraged representations of himself after the extinction of his body, probably not feeling bound by these restrictions, and because of their cult of form. The Greeks were the first to attempt a sculptural representation of the Buddha. In many parts of the ancient world, the Greeks did develop syncretic divinities that could become a common religious focus for populations with different traditions. A well-known example is the syncretic god Serapis, introduced by Ptolemy I in Egypt, which combined aspects of Greek and Egyptian gods. In India as well, it was only natural for the Greeks to create a single common divinity by combining the image of a Greek god-king with the traditional attributes of the Buddha. Many of the stylistic elements in the representations of the Buddha point to Greek influence. The Greco-Roman toga-like wavy robe covering both shoulders, the contrapposto stance of the upright figures, the stylicized Mediterranean curly hair and top knot apparently derived from the style of the Belvedere Apollo, and the measured quality of the faces, all rendered with strong artistic realism. A large quantity of sculptures combining Buddhist and purely Hellenistic styles and iconography were excavated at the Gandharan site of Hadda. Several influential Greek Buddhist monks are recorded. Mahayana was a Greek Buddhist head monk, according to the Maja of Abasa, who led 30,000 Buddhist monks from the Greek city of Alessandria to Sri Lanka for the dedication of the great stupa in Anuradhapura during the rule of King Menanda I. Dharmarakshita, or Dhammarakita, was one of the missionaries sent by the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka to proselytize the Buddhist faith. He is described as being a Greek in the Maja of Abasa. Central Asian expansion. A Buddhist gold coin from India was found in northern Afghanistan at the archaeological site of Tillya and dated to the 1st century AD. On the reverse, it depicts a lion in the moving position with an antipada in front of it, with the Kharosthi legend, Sih Vigatabe. The Mahayana Buddhists symbolize Buddha with animals such as a lion, an elephant, a horse, or a bull. A pair of feet was also used. The symbol called by the archaeologists and historians as Nandipada is actually a composite symbol. The symbol at the top symbolizes the middle path, the Buddha Dhamma. The circle with the center symbolizes chakra. Thus, the composite symbol symbolizes Dhamma chakra. Thus, the symbols on the reverse of the coin jointly symbolize Buddha rolling the Dhamma chakra. In the lion capital of Sarnath, India, Buddha rolling the Dhamma chakra is depicted on the wall of the cylinder with lion, elephant, horse and bull rolling the Dhamma chakras. On the obverse, an almost naked man only wearing an Hellenistic chlamys and wearing a headdress rolls a Buddhist wheel. The legend in Kharosthi reads, Dharmakakrapravata. It has been suggested that this may be an early representation of the Buddha. The headdress symbolizes the middle path. Thus, the man with the headdress is a person who adheres to the middle path. In one of the Indus Valley seals also, we find similar headdress worn by 9 women. Thus, on both sides of the coin, we find Buddha rolling the Dhamma chakra. As no scientific study on literary and physical symbolization of Buddha and Buddhism was conducted by the archaeologists and historians, imaginary and false interpretations were only given on coins, seals, Brahmi and other inscriptions and other archaeological finds. Rise of Mahayana. Several scholars have suggested that the Prajnaparamita Sutras, which are among the earliest Mahayana sutras, developed among the Mahasamgika along the Krsna River in the Andhra region of South India. The earliest Mahayana sutras to include the very first versions of the Prajnaparamita genre, along with texts concerning Akshvyu Buddha, which were probably written down in the 1st century BCE in the south of India. Guangxing states, several scholars have suggested that the Prajnaparamita probably developed among the Mahasamghikas in southern India, in the Andhra country, on the Krsna River. A.K. Warder believes that the Mahayana originated in the south of India and almost certainly in the Andhra country. Anthony Barber and Sie Padma note that historians of Buddhist thought have been aware for quite some time that such pivotally important Mahayana Buddhist thinkers as Nagarjuna, Dignaga, Candrakirti, Aryadeva, and Bhavaviveka, among many others, formulated the theories while living in Buddhist communities in Andhra. Quote, they note that the ancient Buddhist sites in the lower Krsna valley, including Amaravati, Nagarjuna Konda and Jagayapyata, can be traced to at least the 3rd century BCE, if not earlier. Akra Harakawa notes the evidence suggests that many early Mahayana scriptures originated in South India. The two fourth councils. The fourth council is said to have been convened in the reign of the Kashmir Emperor Kanishka around 100 AD at Jalandhar, or, in Kashmir. Theravada Buddhism had its own fourth council in Sri Lanka about 200 years earlier, in which the Pali Canon was written down in toto for the first time. Therefore, there were two fourth councils, one in Sri Lanka and one in Kashmir. It is said that for the fourth council of Kashmir, Kanishka gathered 500 monks headed by Vasumitra, partly, it seems, to compile extensive commentaries on the Abhidhamma, although it is possible that some editorial work was carried out upon the existing canon itself. Allegedly, during the council there were altogether 300,000 verses and over 9 million statements compiled, and it took 12 years to complete. The main fruit of this council was the compilation of the vast commentary known as the Maja of Abasa, an extensive compendium and reference work on a portion of the Sarvastivadin Abhidhamma. Scholars believe that it was also around this time that a significant change was made in the language of the Sarvastivadin canon, by converting an earlier Prakrit version into Sanskrit, although this change was probably effected without significant loss of integrity to the canon. This event was of particular significance since Sanskrit was the sacred language of Brahmanism in India, and was also being used by other thinkers, regardless of the specific religious or philosophical allegiance, thus enabling a far wider audience to gain access to Buddhist ideas and practices. For this reason, there was a growing tendency among Buddhist scholars in India thereafter to write their commentaries and treatises in Sanskrit. Many of the early schools, however, such as Theravada, never switched to Sanskrit, partly because Buddha explicitly forbade translation of his discourses into what was an elitist religious language. He wanted his monks to use a local language instead, a language which could be understood by all. Over time, however, the language of the Theravada scriptures became a scholarly or elitist language as well, exactly opposite to what the Buddha had explicitly commanded.